Hi, my name is Jim, and I've always been fascinated by words that we use all the time, but we don't really know what they mean. Take "thee," for example. I'm going to use the word "thee" a lot in this speech. In fact, I just did. And you probably use it all the time too, but I have no clue what it means, how to define it, how to describe it to someone who doesn't know the English language. Luckily, it doesn't matter if I can't define "thee," but what might be a little more consequential, how about the word leadership? Do you know what it means? You know, it doesn't matter what kind of group I ask. If I ask students or managers or executives or even folks in the C-suite, not only do people struggle to answer the question, they won't even make eye contact with me when I ask it because they're afraid I'll call on them and make them answer. Now, some people tend to think of it as popularity, our charisma, our public speaking ability, our carefully crafted image, or even financial success. Let me tell you as a researcher that we don't believe leadership really has anything to do with most of those things. Since we know it when we see it, we can't define it, but we kind of know it when we see it, maybe the best way to learn about leadership is to talk about it through a story. Let me tell you a story from the United States Civil War about a man named Colonel Joshua Lewis Chamberlain. He was a professor in Maine who was so motivated by the Union cause that he signed up to be an officer. And he commanded a unit called the 20th Maine. Started out with 1,600 men, but by July 1st, 1863, down to about 266 because, well, war is hell. Let's pretend you're Joshua Chamberlain, and you are commanded to guard a point of strategic importance in Gettysburg called Little Round Top. The Battle of Gettysburg is tomorrow. Now, if you know anything about the Civil War, you know it's between the North and the South. Gettysburg's in Pennsylvania, pretty far to the north. So if the Confederacy's pushed this far north, they're doing pretty good. This is the one moment where it looks like the Confederacy is going to win the Civil War. We need to get this one, Colonel Chamberlain. Unfortunately, with only 250 men, you're like, I can't defend this position possibly. You go to high command, say, I need more men. They say they don't have any. You say, you don't understand. I've got to have more men. They say, nope. You say, it can't be done without more men. And they say, fine. And they give you 120 mutineers from the 2nd Maine. Now, history is a little vague as to why these 120 men were so angry. One of the reasons that pops up a lot in the history books is because of a bureaucratic bungle that the government made that could never possibly happen in the modern era. Where basically, remember the 19th century, these guys can't read, they can't write for the most part. They thought they were signing contracts for 2-year contracts for service. The government accidentally gave them contracts for 3 years of service, and now the 2 years are done. So they think they're done. They think they're going home to their wives, to their families, to their livelihoods, to their farms, only for men with guns to stop them and say, nope, you've got another year. Well, no, I don't. I only signed for 2. Nope, you signed for 3. It's right here. You can imagine why they might be irate. Luckily, today's government would never do anything like that. So Colonel Chamberlain's got these 120 mutineers, but he really needs them to fight for him. So he says, you know, what do I do? How do I get them to fight for me? High command says, well, you know, make them. You can shoot them if they disobey. You have the right to do that. So again, imagine you're Joshua Chamberlain. Think about what you would say in this position. You're going to give a speech to them that night. You need to motivate them to fight for the Union. What would your teachers say? What would your coaches say? What would your boss say to get these men to fight for the Union in this pivotal moment in our nation's history? Now, my students are often surprised when I tell them that there are no surviving YouTube clips of this speech from 1863. But what we do have are diaries, journal entries, letters written home, and historians think they've been able to piece together the gist of what apparently was a fairly short speech. These probably weren't his exact words, but this is kind of a combination of everything that it seems like people have managed to piece together. Here's what Colonel Chamberlain actually said. I've been told that if you don't come with me and serve in this Union Army, I can shoot you, but you know I won't do that. Not to good Maine men. We're down below half strength, the Confederates are coming, and we need you, no doubt about that. So many of us have come and served and died, and we did it because it was the right thing to do. We're an army going out to set other men free, and what we're fighting for in the end is for each other. We know not of the future and cannot plan for it much, but the cause for which we fight is higher. Our thought is wider. That thought is our power. But I think if we lose this fight, the war will be over. We'll lose the whole war. But if you choose to come with us, I'll be personally grateful. That was the whole speech. 120 men signed up to fight the next day. And the Battle of Gettysburg went up and down. Different sides had the momentum at different points, but there was one critical moment where up on Little Round Top, Colonel Chamberlain and his men were starting to run out of ammunition. If I was in that situation, I'd probably run like hell. That's not what they did. A bayonet charge was called for. They launched. They struck the surprised and demoralized Confederates, setting off a domino effect that ended with the Union winning the Battle of Gettysburg. The Battle of Gettysburg was the turning point that caused the Union to win the Civil War. The Civil War was the turning point that changed the course of a nation. It all came back to that speech, that fantastic example of leadership from Colonel Chamberlain. So let's talk about that just a little bit really quick. What did he do? He didn't coerce, he persuaded. Now, unless you're in the mafia, your boss probably doesn't have as much power over you as Colonel Chamberlain had over his men. Sure, your boss can fire you, could demote you, give you a bad performance evaluation, something like that. Colonel Chamberlain could kill these people. He had the right to do that. That's the ultimate power to get people to do what they want. But he said, nope. He gave it up with the very first line of the speech. He gave up that power. He didn't want to coerce them. He wanted to persuade them because he believed that they would fight better if they fought because they wanted to, not because they have to. And then he talked about them. He persuaded the men that the cause was noble and worth doing. We're an army going out to set other men free. What we're fighting for in the end is for each other. So I ask you, as a leader or someone who wants to be a leader, think about what your team does, your organization does. Is your cause noble and worth doing? Think about that for a second. The answer might surprise you. One time I was giving this talk and there were two banks in the room and someone from the first bank stood up and said, that's not really what we do. It's not noble and worth doing. We do investments. We make money. Someone from the second bank stood up and said, and by the way, second bank does exactly the same thing as the first bank, same goods, services, said, of course what we do is noble and worth doing. We help people afford their dreams. We help people retire in comfort. We help people buy their first home, their first car. How could that not be noble? Sometimes it's all in the way you think about it, the way you frame it. What's your real goal as you're making money? He persuaded the men that the cause was noble and worth doing, and he respected them. He tried to help them. But he said, even though you've been wronged, I need you to come with me and help others. And in the course of that, he turned the tide of the war, changed the course of a whole nation. Now there's a name for this approach to leadership. There are people who talk about it. One that shares power instead of hoarding it. One that puts others first and develops them and helps them to grow and succeed. One that gets together with teammates and followers to talk about how what we're doing can make a difference in the broader world. It's called servant leadership. And it was founded by a man called Robert Greene, who worked at AT&T as their very first director of management research. He studied leadership, what worked and what didn't, for over 3 decades before coming to this conclusion that this servant leadership thing was, in his opinion, the best way to lead. The nonprofit he formed, today it's called the Greenleaf Center for Servant Leadership. It's still around. It's still doing great things to promote this style of leadership, which I know sounds idealistic, a little bit like a fairy tale. Now let me come to you as a professor and a researcher of leadership. There's a lot of evidence that it actually works. It's not a fairy tale. There are literally hundreds of peer-reviewed, published, quantitative papers, hundreds, showing that servant leadership has a unique, empirically demonstrated effect on motivation, performance, satisfaction, commitment, finances, everything we're interested in. It has a unique effect right now in the modern context. In fact, a lot of research indicates that servant leadership is even more effective than more goal-centric forms of leadership or profit-centric forms of leadership. Here's something I call the paradox of leadership. If you want to make lots of profit, talk less about profit and talk more about what your team, what your organization is doing to help customers, to help employees, to help partners, to help communities. Research shows that actually less of a profit focus will help you get to more profit. So what is leadership? Well, former President Dwight Eisenhower has a really great definition. He said, leadership is getting people to do the things you want done because they want to do them. Not because they have to, not because they're forced to, not because they're worried they'll get fired, not even because they want a promotion or they're trying to suck up to the boss, but because they genuinely want to do these things. That's real leadership. Great definition. But how do you do that? How do you motivate people to want to do these things? Well, research and one of the pivotal moments in our country's history show that servant leadership might just be the best way to do it. I still don't know what the word "the" means. I probably never will. But I'm starting to get just a little bit of an idea about what leadership might be. It's sharing power. It's developing people. It's helping them grow. It's having foresight and thinking ahead and listening to what ideas others have. And it's motivating by talking to people together to talk about how is what we're doing making a positive difference for someone, for a customer, for a partner, for another employee, for another team, for our community, maybe even for broader society if you want to get ambitious. And I know it may sound idealistic and not like what you're expecting from a leadership talk, but research says it really, really has a uniquely powerful effect. It's called servant leadership. Read about it, think about it, give it a try. It might just change the way you look at organizational and team management and leadership for the rest of your life. It can make you a better leader. It might just help you to make a big difference in the life of someone else. A customer, an employee, a follower, maybe your community. Everybody wins. And that's what leadership is.